The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, firm and final. "You're free to go." The words hung in the air like a lifeline, but they didn't feel real. I stood there, unmoving, as if waiting for someone to yank it all away again. For 2 years, I had fought tooth and nail to prove my innocence, to claw my way out of the pit they had thrown me into. And now, it was over. At least, it was supposed to be. I felt the courtroom's weight pressing down on me, the hushed murmurs of the spectators, the creak of chairs as people shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. The gavel had fallen, but it didn't feel like closure. It felt more like a hollow echo, a distant sound in a life I no longer recognized. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the polished wooden panels of the courtroom doors. The man staring back at me looked older, worn down, like he'd aged a decade in the past 2 years. Lines creased his face, my face, a reminder of the sleepless nights, the endless legal battles, and the humiliation of being labeled a fraud. Once, I had walked into rooms with confidence, holding my head high. Now, I felt like a ghost of the man I used to be. My lawyer gave me a reassuring pat on the back, his words lost in the noise of my thoughts. I nodded absently, muttering something that might have been a thank you, but I didn't feel thankful. How could I? They had stripped me of everything, my career, my reputation, my sense of security, and while the court had finally recognized the truth, it didn't undo the damage. The world would still see me as the man accused of fraud, the man whose name had been dragged through the mud. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt harsh, almost mocking. People passed by, oblivious to the storm that had been my life. I wanted to scream, to grab someone, anyone, and tell them what I had been through. But what was the point? To them, I was just another stranger. Another face in the crowd. I fumbled for my phone, a reflex more than anything. Maybe I hoped for a message from my wife, a sign that she was waiting for me, ready to welcome me home with open arms. Instead, the screen was blank, save for a few notifications from apps I hadn't used in months. A cold realization settled in my chest. No one was waiting for me. The car ride home was silent, the city's noise muted by the closed windows. My mind raced, replaying the events that had led me here. The accusations, the arrests, the trial, it all felt like a twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And now, even with my name cleared, the nightmare wasn't over. I thought about my son, the only person who had stood by me through it all. He was just a teenager, but he had shown more strength and loyalty than most adults. During visitation hours at the detention center, he would sit across from me, his eyes filled with a determination that kept me going. "I know you didn't do it, Dad," he'd say, his voice unwavering. Those words had been my anchor, my reason to keep fighting. But what about my wife? The woman who had promised to stand by me in sickness and in health, through good times and bad. Her absence during the trial had been deafening, a silence that spoke louder than words. At first, I had convinced myself it was too painful for her, that she couldn't bear to see me like that. But as the weeks turned into months, the excuses started to wear thin. I remembered the early days of our marriage when we were inseparable. We had built a life together, shared dreams, and created a family. I used to believe we were a team, partners in every sense of the word. But now, I wasn't so sure. The distance between us had grown like a chasm, and I couldn't tell if it had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, or if it was something new, something I hadn't noticed until it was too late. The car pulled up to my house. No, the house didn't feel like home anymore. The front yard looked the same, the flower beds neatly trimmed, the porch light still flickering the way it always had. But as I stepped out of the car, I felt a pang of hesitation. Was this still my place? Did I still belong here? Was this where I belonged? Was I still enough? My words were foggy. The car pulled into my driveway. Was this still my place? Did I still belong here? I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, before finally reaching for my phone again. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure of what I was looking for. A text? A missed call? Something to indicate that my release mattered to someone other than me. And then a notification appeared. A message from my son. Relief washed over me as I opened it, expecting a simple "welcome home" or "glad you're okay." But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. It was a video message. I hesitated before pressing play, a sense of dread settling in my gut. The video started, and there was my son, his face filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "Dad," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Mom's throwing a party right now to celebrate, thinking your conviction would stick. The entire law firm is here, toasting with her." My grip on the phone tightened as the video panned across a room I recognized all too well. The living room of the house I had worked so hard to provide for. Familiar faces filled the screen. Colleagues, friends, people I had once trusted. They were laughing, drinking, celebrating. And then I saw her, my wife, standing at the center of it all. Her smile, brighter than I'd seen in years. "They all knew you were innocent but framed you for fraud," my son's voice continued, each word like a dagger to my chest. "And guess what? The managing partner is proposing to Mom tonight." The video ended, leaving me staring at the screen, my mind racing to process what I had just seen. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of the truth pulling me under. For 2 years, I had fought to clear my name, believing that once I did, everything would go back to normal. But this was a betrayal I hadn't seen coming, a knife in the back from the people I thought were on my side. As I stood there, frozen in place, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. The warmth of the day faded into a chilling cold, mirroring the emptiness I felt inside. The words from the judge echoed in my mind once more. "You're free to go." But freedom had never felt so hollow. My hands trembled as I stared at the video on my phone, my son's voice ringing in my ears. Every word hit me like a punch to the gut, unraveling the last thread of stability I thought I had. The celebration, the toasts, the laughter, it was all there, glaring and undeniable. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, even though every second of it was tearing me apart. I watched as the camera panned across the room, faces I had once trusted coming into view. There was the head of the accounting department, raising a glass, the HR manager smiling as she clinked her champagne flute against someone else's. And then, there was the managing partner, standing tall with a self-satisfied grin, holding court in the middle of the room like a king among his loyal subjects. But it was my wife who commanded the spotlight. She stood next to him, her smile wide and genuine, radiating a joy I hadn't seen in years. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, a gesture so casual, yet so intimate it made my stomach churn. She was laughing at something he said, her head tilting back in a way that used to make my heart skip a beat. Now, it just made me feel sick. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a party. It wasn't just a celebration of my supposed downfall. It was a confirmation of something I had refused to acknowledge, something I had pushed to the back of my mind for months, maybe even years. This was their moment, their triumph, and I was the fool who had been sacrificed to make it all possible. End of section 7. My son's voice broke through the haze, pulling me back to the present. They all knew you were innocent, but framed you for fraud. I replayed those words over and over, each repetition slicing deeper into my soul. The people in that room had been more than colleagues. They had been part of my life, my extended family in a way. I had trusted them, confided in them, believed that we were working toward the same goals. And now, I knew the truth. They hadn't just turned their backs on me. They had actively conspired to destroy me. They had taken everything I had worked for, everything I had built, and used it against me. And my wife, my partner, my supposed soulmate had been at the center of it all. The women, I tried to think back, to piece together the moments that had led to this betrayal. Had there been signs? Had I missed something obvious? I thought about the late nights she spent at the office, the business trips that seemed to happen more and more frequently, the way she had started to pull away from me, emotionally and physically. At the time, I had chalked it up to stress, to the pressures of her job. I had told myself it was just a rough patch, something we would get through together. But now, it all felt like a lie. The distance between us hadn't been the result of stress. It had been the result of a calculated plan, a betrayal so deep and so deliberate that I could hardly breathe. She hadn't been pulling away because of work. She had been pulling away because she was aligning herself with someone else, someone who could offer her more than I ever could. I thought about the managing partner, the man who had been my mentor, my friend. He had taken me under his wing when I first joined the firm, guiding me, teaching me, helping me navigate the complex world of corporate law. I had looked up to him, admired him, even considered him a father figure in some ways. And now he was proposing to my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted with my life. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional too. They had framed me for fraud, orchestrated my downfall with precision and care. They had taken my reputation, my career, and my freedom all for their own gain. And they had done it with smiles on their faces, toasting their success while I sat in a jail cell, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. How had everything become so wrong? I replayed the video again, unable to stop myself. Every detail felt like a fresh wound. The decorations, the catered food, the expensive champagne. It was all so carefully planned, so perfectly executed. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gathering. This was a celebration. Months, maybe years in the making. And then there was the moment that shattered what little resolve I had left. The camera caught the managing partner reaching into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. My wife's eyes lit up, her hand flying to her mouth in what I could only describe as a rehearsed display of surprise. He dropped to one knee, the room erupting into cheers and applause as he opened the box to reveal a glittering diamond ring. My son's voice came through again, quiet but steady. "The managing partner is proposing to Mom tonight." I couldn't watch anymore. I turned off the video, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to cry, but I couldn't do any of those things. I just sat there, staring at the blank screen, trying to process what I had just seen. The weight of their betrayal was suffocating. It wasn't just about the affair, although that alone was devastating enough. It was about the length they had gone to in order to destroy me, to strip me of everything I held dear. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the sheer audacity of their actions. I thought about my son, the only person who had been honest with me, the only person who had stayed loyal through it all. He had seen what I couldn't, or maybe what I had refused to see. He had been forced to carry the burden of their secrets, to watch as his mother and her lover celebrated my downfall. And yet, he had still found the courage to tell me the truth, to expose their betrayal even when it meant shattering the fragile illusion of our family. I felt a surge of gratitude for him, mixed with a deep, burning anger at the people who had put him in this position. They had robbed me of my life, but they had also robbed him of his innocence, his sense of security. He deserved better than this, and so did I. As the car rolled to a stop outside my house, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The fight wasn't over. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken everything. I still had my son, my integrity, and the truth on my side. They might have won the battle, but the war was far from over. Sitting in the car outside the house, I found myself immobilized by a cocktail of emotions I could barely keep straight. Anger, betrayal, sadness, disbelief. They were all tangled together, pulling me in different directions. My mind was racing, filled with questions I couldn't answer and feelings I didn't know how to handle. It was as if the very foundation of my life had crumbled beneath me, leaving me to sift through the rubble and figure out what pieces, if any, were worth salvaging. I stared at the house, the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary, my safe haven. Every detail felt like a betrayal in its own right. The neatly trimmed hedges, the welcoming porch light, the curtains I'd helped pick out, all of it seemed to mock me now, a facade of normalcy hiding the rot that had taken hold inside. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a crime scene, a monument to lies and betrayal that had unfolded behind its walls. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I fought the urge to storm inside. What would I even say? What could I say? The thought of confronting her filled me with equal parts dread and rage. I imagined her standing there, her face a mask of fake concern or worse, indifference. Would she even bother trying to deny it? Or would she just look at me with that infuriating calm she always used when she thought she was right? The image of the managing partner proposing to her flashed through my mind again, and my stomach churned. How long had this been going on? How many times had he sat across from me in meetings, pretending to be my ally while secretly plotting my downfall? How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me goodbye, and then turned around to be with him? The betrayal wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. I had let my guard down, trusted too easily, believed in the people around me without questioning their motives. I had been so focused on my work, so confident in my ability to provide for my family that I hadn't seen what was happening right in front of me. I had been blind, and now I was paying the price. I thought about my son, the only person who had given me the truth. He was just a kid, yet he had shown more courage and loyalty than most adults. I couldn't imagine how hard it must have been for him to send that video, knowing what it would do to me. He deserved better than this mess, better than the lies and manipulation that had surrounded him for so long. So a part of me wanted to drive away, to leave this house and everything it represented behind. But where would I go? This was supposed to be my home, my life. Running wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't undo the damage or give me the answers I needed. I reached for my phone again, my fingers hovering over the screen. I could call my son, tell him I'd seen the video, let him know I wasn't angry with him for exposing the truth. But what would I say after that? How could I explain what I was feeling when I didn't even understand it myself? The thought of going inside, of facing her and the reality of what had happened was almost too much to bear. But I couldn't sit in the car forever. I couldn't let them win by retreating, by letting their betrayal dictate my actions. I had spent 2 years fighting to clear my name, to reclaim my life. I wasn't about to give up now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The air felt heavy, as if the weight of everything I had learned was pressing down on me, suffocating me. But I forced myself to push through it, to open the car door and step out into the night. The walk to the front door felt like a marathon, every step weighed down by the knowledge of what awaited me on the other side. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder of the anger and betrayal I was carrying with me. I reached the door, my hand hesitating on the handle. For a moment I thought about turning back, about leaving this house and never looking back. But I couldn't do that. I needed answers. I needed closure. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt deliberate, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I glanced around, my eyes taking in the familiar surroundings. Everything looked the same, but it felt different, tainted. I walked through the house, each step bringing back memories that now felt hollow. The family photos on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, the little touches that had made this place feel like home. They all felt like lies now, reminders of a life that had been built on a foundation of deceit. The living room was empty, but the faint smell of champagne lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the celebration that had taken place here just hours ago. I could almost hear their laughter, their toasts, their congratulatory speeches. The thought made my stomach turn. I made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I didn't know what I was looking for. Proof, perhaps, or maybe just some sign that this wasn't real, that it was all some kind of misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes, heard it with my own ears. There was no denying what had happened. Reaching the bedroom, I hesitated again. This was the heart of the betrayal, the place where so many lies had been told, so many secrets kept. I pushed the door open, half expecting to find her there, waiting for me. But the room was empty, the bed neatly made, as if nothing had ever been out of place. I stood there for a long time, staring at the room that had once been a sanctuary, a place of comfort and intimacy. Now, it felt cold and foreign, a space I no longer recognized. The memories that came flooding back were tainted, every moment of happiness overshadowed by the knowledge of what had been happening behind my back. The anger simmering inside me began to boil over, and I clenched my fists, trying to keep it in check. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, to destroy everything that reminded me of her. But I knew that wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the betrayal or make the pain go away. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. The weight of everything I had learned was crushing, and for the first time since I had been released, I felt truly lost. The fight wasn't over, but I didn't know how to move forward. I thought about my son again, about the courage it had taken for him to send me that video. He had believed in me when no one else had, and I owed it to him to keep fighting, to find a way to rebuild our lives. I couldn't let this betrayal define me. As I sat there in the silence, I made a promise to myself. I would get through this, not just for me, but for him. I would find a way to rise above the lies and the betrayal, to reclaim my life and my dignity. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken everything. I still had my son, my truth, and my resolve. And that would be enough. After sitting in that suffocating silence for what felt like hours, I forced myself to move. The stillness of the house weighed on me, but I couldn't just sit there drowning in my thoughts. I walked out of the bedroom, every step feeling heavier than the last. The truth I had uncovered gnawed at me, refusing to let go, and I couldn't help but think of everything I had been through to get to this point. 2 years. 2 years of my life stolen, 2 years of being treated like a criminal, of having my name dragged through the mud, of seeing the people I thought cared about me disappear when I needed them most. And now here I was, standing in the remnants of what used to be my life, staring down the reality of just how far their betrayal had gone. The house was eerily quiet as I wandered through it, my mind replaying moments I had thought were innocent but now seemed laced with hidden agendas. I remembered the times my wife had been distant, brushing off my concerns with excuses that I had believed because I didn't want to imagine the alternative. The business trips, the late-night calls, the sudden coldness, it all fit together now, a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. I thought about the managing partner again, the man who had been at the center of my professional world. I had looked up to him, trusted him, and even considered him a mentor. To realize now that he had orchestrated my downfall was almost too much to bear. How many times had he sat across from me, smiling and shaking my hand, while secretly plotting to destroy everything I had worked for? How many times had he lied to my face, all while growing closer to my wife? The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. They hadn't just taken away my job or my reputation. They had tried to erase me entirely. The conviction, the public disgrace, the financial ruin, it was all part of their plan, and now they were celebrating their victory, toasting to the success of their scheme, while I tried to piece my life back together. The memory of the video my son had sent me resurfaced, his voice echoing in my mind. They all knew you were innocent but framed you for fraud. The weight of those words crushed me. These weren't just mistakes or misunderstandings. This was a deliberate act of betrayal by people I had trusted, people I had considered family. I found myself standing in the living room, the same place where they had celebrated my supposed downfall. The air still carried a faint trace of champagne and perfume, remnants of the party they had thrown while I was fighting for my freedom. My eyes scanned the room, taking in the evidence of their revelry. The empty glasses, the crumpled napkins, the half-burned candle. It was surreal, standing there in the aftermath of their celebration. This was my house, my life, and yet it felt like I was a stranger intruding on someone else's world. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built, had been stolen from me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. But as I stood there, something shifted inside me. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface began to harden into resolve. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken everything. I still had my son, my freedom, and the truth. And I wasn't going to let them win. I thought about my son again, about the courage it must have taken for him to send me that video. He had been living in the middle of this mess, surrounded by lies and betrayal, yet he had chosen to stand by me. He had seen through the facade, refused to be a part of their deceit, and given me the truth when no one else would. I owed it to him to keep fighting, to prove that the truth mattered, that justice mattered. I couldn't let their lies define me, couldn't let their betrayal be the end of my story. They had underestimated me, assumed that I would crumble under the weight of their schemes. But they were wrong. I turned and walked into the kitchen, my steps steady and deliberate. The room was spotless, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I opened a drawer and pulled out a notebook, the same one I had used to jot down my thoughts and strategies during the trial. It felt fitting, somehow, to use it again now, as I planned my next move. Sitting at the table, I began to write. The words came slowly at first, each one carefully considered, but soon they began to flow. I wrote about the evidence I had uncovered, the connections I had made, the lies that had been told. I wrote about the managing partner and my wife, about their betrayal and their plans. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. They had framed me, stolen from me, and celebrated my downfall. But they hadn't broken me. I was still here, still standing, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The hours passed as I wrote, the pages filling with details and ideas. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that they would fight back with everything they had. But I also knew that I had something they couldn't take away. The truth. By the time I finished, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the room. I set down the pen and leaned back in the chair, exhaustion washing over me. But it was a different kind of exhaustion now, one that came with a sense of purpose. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this. I had been naive, trusting, and too focused on my work to see what was happening around me. But now, I was different, stronger, sharper, more determined. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken everything, and they hadn't taken my will to fight. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, I made a promise to myself I would rebuild my life, not as a victim, but as someone who had survived, someone who had been broken but refused to stay broken. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't afraid. I had faced the worst they could throw at me and come out on the other side, and now it was my turn to fight back. The first few days after uncovering the truth felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions, plans, and uncertainties. Every moment was a battle to keep my thoughts clear and focused, to resist the temptation to let anger and despair consume me. I couldn't afford to let my emotions cloud my judgment. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about setting things right, not just for myself, but for my son, who deserved better than the lies and betrayal that had surrounded him for so long. I started by gathering every piece of information I could, the evidence from my trial, the financial records I'd fought so hard to obtain, and the documentation I had meticulously saved over the years all became my arsenal. The video my son had sent me was the spark, but I needed more if I was going to expose what they had done. I wasn't naive enough to think this would be easy. The people who had framed me were powerful, well-connected, and skilled at covering their tracks. But they weren't invincible. The house, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt like a battleground. Every corner held reminders of the life I had lost, the life I was now fighting to reclaim. I spent hours combing through old files, reading emails, and analyzing every detail I could remember about my interactions with the managing partner and my wife. Patterns began to emerge, subtle at first, but undeniable once I started connecting the dots. I reached out to a private investigator, someone who came highly recommended but operated discreetly. Trust wasn't something I could afford to give easily anymore, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. The investigator took the video and the information I had gathered, promising to dig deeper into the connections between the law firm and my wife. It felt like handing over a piece of my burden, a small relief in the midst of an overwhelming storm. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with my son. He was the one person who had stood by me, the one person who had seen through the lies and given me the truth when I needed it most. I couldn't let him feel like he was alone in this. We talked often, sometimes about the betrayal and sometimes about anything else. School, his friends, his plans for the future. Those conversations became a lifeline for me. A reminder that there was still something worth fighting for. The days turned into weeks as the investigation progressed. Each new piece of evidence felt like a small victory, a step closer to exposing the truth. I learned about the financial transactions that had been used to frame me, the falsified documents, and the carefully orchestrated plan to remove me from the picture. It was meticulous and calculated, designed to leave no trace. But one night, as I sat at the kitchen table reviewing the latest findings from the investigator, I felt a sense of clarity that had eluded me for so long. This wasn't just about clearing my name or seeking revenge. It was about reclaiming my agency, proving to myself and to everyone else that I wasn't the person they had tried to make me out to be. It was the day I decided to take action was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had the evidence, the support of the investigator, and the determination to see this through. I filed a formal complaint with the authorities, presenting the evidence of fraud and conspiracy that had been uncovered. It was a calculated risk, one that could either lead to justice or bring more trouble my way. But I couldn't let fear hold me back. As the legal process began, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The same system that had failed me once was now being called upon to hold the real perpetrators accountable. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't quick, but it was a step in the right direction. The managing partner and my wife had built their plans on the assumption that no one would challenge them. They had underestimated the power of persistence and the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. The media caught wind of the story, and suddenly my name was back in the headlines. But this time the narrative was different. The focus wasn't on my supposed guilt, but on the corruption and betrayal that had led to my conviction. People began to take notice, questioning the actions of the law firm and the integrity of those involved. It was both vindicating and overwhelming, a reminder of how quickly public perception could shift. Through it all, my son remained my anchor. His unwavering support gave me the strength to keep going, even when the process felt unbearable. We spent more time together, rebuilding the trust and connection that had been strained during my time away. He had grown up so much in those 2 years, forced to navigate a world of lies and deceit. But despite everything, he had come out stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I could have ever imagined. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the cracks in their facade began to show. Witnesses came forward, documents were uncovered, and the truth started to emerge. The managing partner, once so confident in his position, was now scrambling to defend himself. My wife, too, found herself facing questions she couldn't answer, her carefully constructed image beginning to crumble. The day the charges were formally announced against them was one I would never forget. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for the truth, for justice, and for everyone who had ever been wronged by those in positions of power. As I stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and onlookers, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for so long. But even as the dust began to settle, I knew the journey wasn't over. There were still scars to heal, relationships to mend, and a life to rebuild. The betrayal had left its mark on me, but it hadn't broken me. If anything, it had made me stronger, more determined to live my life with integrity and purpose. In the weeks that followed, I began to find a new sense of normalcy. The house that had once felt like a prison now felt like a place of healing, a space where I could start over. My son and I worked together to create a new chapter, one built on honesty, resilience, and looking back, I realized that the betrayal, as painful as it had also been a turning point. It had forced me to confront the truth about the people in my life, to reevaluate my priorities, and to find strength I didn't know I had. It had been a long and difficult road, but I had come out the other side not as the man I once was, but as someone stronger, wiser, and more determined to live life on my own terms.